Joining us live now is Liberal Senator James Paterson, who's been waiting patiently. Senator Paterson, thank you for your time. There is a lot of grim news in there, but as the Chief Medical Officer for Victoria did highlight there, we have the same case numbers in Australia that the US reports every 10 minutes. So while things are looking grim, there is still some hope, but it's all down to people observing these physical distancing measures.
That's right, Annalise. These are very sobering, very concerning numbers. And coming here to you from Melbourne, I can tell you Victorians are very concerned and they're very frustrated, and some of them are very angry about having to go back into lockdown for the second time. I'm particularly concerned on behalf of the small business community, which was just starting to open up again, just start to get back on their feet again, and to have this news has been very disappointing for them. Of course, the only thing we can all do now is follow the directions of the Chief Health Officer of Victoria, Brett Sutton, follow the medical advice that's given to us, and hope that the Victorian government is able to get on top of this. Certainly on the part of the federal government, we have provided and offered all the support available possible to the Victorian government to help them get through this crisis, because it's in everyone's interest that they do. It's in the interest of our health, it's in the interest of our society, and it's certainly in the interest of our economy.
The advice there was that anyone in Victoria in the Melbourne hotspots should be wearing a mask when they go out. Will you be wearing a mask?
I guess I'll have to go and get some masks, Annalise. I mean, the advice was if you are outside in areas where you can't socially distance, for example, on public transport, in a taxi or in an Uber, then you should be wearing a mask. I think if you're out generally in the community and not close to others, it's not as necessary. And as the Premier said repeatedly, it is a request, not an order. But I think it's a prudent one because it's going to help manage the risk. So like a lot of people, I'll probably be logging on to the internet tonight to work out where I can get some masks from.
I think if you talk to any of our techs there, we've got some lying around the Sky studio. But the other interesting development in that press conference was the $26,000 fine levelled at one party because 20 people needed to get some KFC. Do you sympathise? 1:30 in the morning, party, got to get some fried chicken?
I mean, I'd certainly sympathise with the need to order fried chicken after being at a party and drinking. That's an understandable one. But I don't sympathise with the decision to hold a party when it was very clearly unlawful. And this is a very serious matter. And people do need to understand that these orders are not for fun. They're not for anyone's amusement. They are a serious public health order to get on top of a crisis and to prevent our hospital system from being overloaded. We have avoided the worst of the rest of the world so far, but only because we've been successful so far in following the advice that we've been given, and because we have a relative luxury in Australia of being able to close down our borders that many other countries don't practically have. We can't afford to give up those gains. We have to make sure we get back to the path that we thought we were on only a few weeks ago.
You're right, we shouldn't be laughing because it's not funny to risk public health for a bucket of fried chicken, but it's just more beggar's belief at this point in the pandemic that anyone would be doing that. But the other question on people's minds has been our relationship with China. We had yesterday a pretty strong announcement from the government saying that they will extend those visas for people from Hong Kong living in Australia for the next 5 years with a path to citizenship. That does come at the risk of incensing China, which we have seen happen. Do you think it was still the right move?
Well, it was a very principled announcement by the Prime Minister and Alan Tudge yesterday about welcoming migrants from Hong Kong who may wish to leave given the current circumstances and cancelling our extradition treaty with Hong Kong. But it was also a decision that was completely consistent with our national interests and taken in our national interest. Australia has an immigration system that jealously tries to recruit high talent from around the world, and we have a legal system which jealously guards the sovereignty and the freedoms of our citizens. And it is a sovereign decision of the Australian government to decide who we welcome here on the basis of immigration, and it's a sovereign decision of the Australian government to decide which countries we have an extradition treaty with. Now, very clearly, circumstances have changed in Hong Kong, and from the basis of our strong Australian values, we've changed our approach. The Chinese embassy's statement yesterday, frankly, is almost becoming a parody of itself. I mean, they claimed that it was a threat to China's sovereignty that Australia is welcoming people here to join us, and that it was a threat to China's sovereignty that we've decided that we don't want to be in an extradition arrangement anymore with Hong Kong and therefore with the People's Republic of China. These are just decisions that any proud Australian government consistent with our own values would make. It is no interference at all with anyone else's sovereignty.
Now, it's not unusual for the Chinese government to engage in a bit of hyperbole when they're dealing with international relations. It was a pretty colourful statement, including the comment about China will lead to nothing but lifting a rock only to hit its own feet. But there is some truth in the fact it will have economic repercussions, in particular in the higher education sector. Should we ever expect Australian universities to have the same level of Chinese students after the pandemic that we had before?
Well, if there are repercussions for Australia, that's very regrettable, because no country should be punished for standing up for its national interests and defending its values and sovereignty. But certainly there are repercussions that we're seeing around the world. If you ask the Canadian government about how their relations are with China at the moment, with the Chinese Communist Party, you'll find a very similar story. Just because Canada has stood up for its own sovereignty and its national interests and values, it's equally been punished and had threats of economic coercion made towards it by the Chinese Communist Party. It extends to peace-loving countries like Sweden and Finland and Norway and the United Kingdom. Almost every country in the world, in fact, that has diplomatic relations with the Chinese Communist Party is experiencing strained relations with the Chinese Communist Party. And what that reflects is it's not all of us who've changed our approach, but it is the Chinese government which has changed its approach to the world. And they are reaping what they have sowed in terms of their aggressive wolf warrior diplomacy, their expansion into the South China Sea, their repression of the people of Hong Kong, their long history of repression of the people of Tibet, of Christian minorities within China, and of course the Uyghurs in Xinjiang. It is a change in China that has produced its changing relationship in the world, not something that any of us have done.
Senator James Paterson, we're going to have to leave it there, but thank you for your time.
Thanks, Annalise.